Morning, everybody. 7 o'clock. Two big questions this morning. Will the British-Iranian mother, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, be coming home very soon? And what is President Putin's next move in Ukraine, with some military intelligence suggesting Russia is struggling to conduct its offensive in some parts in the face of Ukrainian resistance? The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss on the programme very shortly. We'll also talk to Nazanin's MP, Tulip Siddiq, who says she's been given her British passport back. It's Wednesday, the 16th of March. What next for Nazanin, who's being held in Iran after the Prime Minister says conversations are still going on? The Foreign Secretary with us very shortly indeed. Explosions in Kyiv this morning, and reports 400 people inside a hospital in Mariupol are being held there. NATO defence ministers meet in Brussels this morning as the Ukrainian president offers a potential olive branch to Russia about his country not joining NATO. Trying to wean the West off Russian oil, the Prime Minister arrives in the Gulf for a visit that's been severely criticised after Saudi Arabia executed 81 people in a single day. Heroes on the front line will speak to the doctors who are caring for children in the besieged city of Kharkiv. A traumatic search. Police apologise after a report finds racism was likely to have been a factor in a young girl being strip-searched on her own. Also on the programme for you this morning, we're going to be speaking to the British academic who was imprisoned in the UAE but released in 2018 to hear his story. And the dance for Ukraine. We'll speak to a Ukrainian ballet dancer about the gala taking place in London this weekend to raise funds for those impacted by the war. Morning, everyone. The thing you all want to know this morning is Nazanin coming home? The woman who will know more than anybody else is the Foreign Secretary. She's with us. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Kay.
Is she coming home?
Well, we are working very hard, and I've made a priority as Foreign Secretary to secure the release of Nazanin, Anousheh and Murad, who are all detained in Iran. We've also made it a priority to pay the debt that we owe to Iran, but I can't say anything more than that, I'm afraid.
Tell us about the debt. 400 million quid thereabouts as a result of tanks that were paid for but then never delivered. Where are we with that?
Well, we have been clear this is a legitimate debt that we do owe Iran, and we have been seeking ways to pay it.
How can we pay it if they're sanctioned and they can't get the money?
Well, I can't go into details, I'm afraid, but we are looking for ways to pay it, and we have been very clear it is a legitimate debt that the United Kingdom owes Iran.
Could it be through, as has been suggested by a previous Foreign Secretary, through medical equipment and medicines and the like?
Well, as I've said, we're looking at ways of paying that debt. That is a separate issue from the issue of the detainees. And it was one of the first things I did as Foreign Secretary was met the Iranian Foreign Minister to urge him to release the unfairly detained British people, namely Nazanin, Murad and Anousheh. We continue to work round the clock to achieve that.
Come back to that in a second. If I could just seek further clarification as far as the debt is concerned. Has that actually been paid in one way or another at the moment, as we speak this morning?
I can't say anything more about that at this moment.
OK. What can you tell us about where the three dual nationals are right now?
I'm afraid, Kay, I also can't say anything about that at this stage.
OK.
What I can tell you is that we are working extremely hard to secure the release of the detainees. We have been working very hard to do that over the past few months. We are in discussions, as the Prime Minister has made clear, but I can't say anything else at this stage. I'm very, very sorry not to be able to say anything else, and I know how desperately the families want to see their loved ones back. But I really can't say anything else at this stage.
Of course, and we're just asking questions that everybody at home will be asking this morning. Everybody very excited about the prospect of these three dual nationals finally being able to come home. Has the dial moved at all over the last few days?
As I say, we have been having discussions. I met my counterpart, the Iranian Foreign Minister, back in September. We've been in regular touch since. We do have a team in Tehran, but I absolutely can't say anything else at this stage.
Do you know when you might be able to say more?
No, I don't.
OK. Let's move on then. But, I mean, obviously we are incredibly hopeful that it looks as though the tone has changed somewhat as far as dealing with Iran is concerned. And there have been lots of times when her husband has been desperate and her young daughter has now, of course, come to live in the UK. So they are hoping against hope that she and the other two will be coming home.
It's a desperate situation. And, you know, my hearts are with the families who have suffered so greatly. And, of course, with Nazanin and Nisha and, of course, Murad as well.
Yeah, OK. So, obviously, you'll update us as soon as you know more. But at this stage, you can't tell her. We know that she got her passport back yesterday. Obviously, that's what her MP tweeted. But that's moving in the right direction, isn't it?
I can't say any more, I'm afraid, Kay. I really can't.
OK. The team in Tehran, obviously, is an interesting move as well. And you've been on my programme before and said that it is a legitimate debt that does need to be paid. So, you know, we'll take what we can from that. As far as Ukraine is concerned, we also heard that 3 British nationals were killed in the explosion near the Poland border over the weekend. Do we know any more about that?
We don't have any more information about that. What we know is that Vladimir Putin's plans are not going according to plan. He's not making the progress expected. And we know the sanctions that we've put on are working. They're having a debilitating effect on the Russian economy. Yesterday, we announced 370 more designations of individuals and oligarchs. We've now designated over 1,000 individuals and entities, more than either the US or the EU. So we are really putting the pressure on everything from banks to the oil and gas industry, to the luxury goods industry, and to individuals in Russia. And those sanctions are really beginning to bite. And we're working very, very closely with our allies to do this because Putin only understands strength. And he will only understand when we successfully stop the funding into the Russian war machine by debilitating the Russian economy, but also we're helping the Ukrainians with their struggle by providing the defensive weapons. My colleague, the Defence Secretary, has supplied NLAWs into Ukraine. We're working with other allies to do that. And we just need to step up these efforts because what we can see is that his offensive isn't working. It's, of course, having a horrendous and devastating effect on the Ukrainian people. We're doing all we can to support with humanitarian aid. But what we need to do now is step up that pressure on Putin to secure the withdrawal from Ukraine and to end this appalling war.
Will there be more sanctions to come?
There will be more sanctions to come. As I've said, we've already sanctioned over 1,000 individuals and entities. We've sanctioned 10 major banks along with the United States. The EU have sanctioned 3 banks. We'd like to see them sanction even more banks. We want to see a full SWIFT freeze. Currently, we've frozen SWIFT for a number of banks, but not all of them. And we want to see a complete elimination of dependency on Russian oil and gas. The UK we have said that by the end of this year, we will stop all oil imports from Russia. But many European countries are very dependent on oil and gas. We want to help them reduce oil and gas dependency so that Russia has nowhere to fund this appalling war machine.
What would more sanctions look like?
Well, more sanctions on individuals. We've got more individuals on our list, more companies, and more sanctions collectively with our allies on the oil and gas industry, as well as encouraging more countries to put sanctions on. So 141 countries voted against Russia at the UN General Assembly. We want to see them follow suit. We've seen countries like South Korea and Japan put sanctions on, but we'd like to see all 141 put sanctions on Russia, so they're completely isolated in the international community.
How do we stop these oligarchs running away, though, like Abramovich seems to have done? OK, we've got some of his, some would say, ill-gotten gains staying here in the UK, but, you know, he managed to flee the country pretty quickly.
This is why it's so important to work with our allies across the G7 and beyond. So there simply is nowhere for these oligarchs to hide. There is nowhere it is legitimate for them to live their lifestyles, have their yachts or have their planes. And that's why we've had a total ban on Russian planes into the United Kingdom. We've also done the same for vessels, and we're encouraging all of our allies to do that. And we're working with our G7 partners on a task force on targeting these assets.
Under what circumstances would Abramovich be welcomed back to the UK?
Well, we have put these sanctions on because of the appalling war that Putin has unleashed. And the first thing we need to see Putin do is withdraw his troops from Ukraine. And then we need to see an end to the threats to Ukraine. We need a positive settlement for Ukraine that guarantees Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And who knows what might happen after that? Clearly, Ukraine has already been devastated. We've seen the appalling scenes in the cities across Ukraine, and there will need to be discussions about how the rebuilding is paid for. I mean, I'm not going to speculate on exactly what will happen in the future, but we need to see those who contributed to this appalling war suffer the consequences, as I'm afraid to say, the people of Ukraine have suffered the consequences.
So just to go back, Abramovich would be welcomed back into the UK once the war in Ukraine has ended?
I haven't said that.
No, I'm asking you a question.
No, I haven't said that, because I'm saying that even if the war was to end, and I fear we are not near the end at this stage, huge devastation has been caused, lives have been lost as a result of this war, and there will need to be a reckoning with all the people who supported Putin.
Including Abramovich and the like?
Including Abramovich.
And the oligarch cash, etc., that has been seized, that you think could potentially be used to pay for the rebuilding of Ukraine?
We're not ruling anything out at this stage.
As far as Ukraine and the President is concerned, he spoke, of course, to Parliament, didn't he, at, I think it was the end of last week. He was very well received when he did that. What more support can we offer the people of Ukraine at the moment? Of course, we're, the great British public are opening their doors and their homes to those that can arrive, and 100,000 people have offered their properties, a room in their properties so far. But what else can the British government do to support the Ukrainian people?
Well, the two things the Ukrainian government want most is us to put more sanctions on Russia and for us to support with more defensive weapons into Ukraine. And we are stepping up on both of those. We're now leading in terms of the number of sanctions we've put on Russian oligarchs and individuals, but we're also way ahead in terms of our sanctions on banks. We want to encourage people to do more, and we also want to reduce European dependence on oil and gas. And the second thing they want is defensive weapons, and we've supplied NLAWs. We're now looking at the Starstreak air defence missiles. The third thing we are doing is supplying humanitarian aid. We're the second biggest humanitarian donor to Ukraine after the United States. We're supplying electricity generators. We're flying children out for hospital treatment in the United Kingdom. We're supplying food. We're supplying medicines. And we continue to do that, working with the neighbouring countries, particularly Poland, who are facing, of course, a major flee of refugees into Poland. So we are working really hard at the front line. It's obviously difficult to get into some of those besieged cities. We're working with the international agencies who are doing that, but we're doing all we can to supply the humanitarian aid. And British people have been incredibly generous. The DEC appeals already raised 130 million, which is way ahead of, I think, many other appeals.
We're almost out of time, but I just want to ask you about Saudi Arabia, which, of course, is where the Prime Minister is at the moment. As a woman, I find it very difficult to comprehend the way that women are treated in a country like Saudi. You have to do business with them. How do you go about that? Do you have to hold your nose?
I do not agree with all of the policies of the Saudi government. Of course I do not. But the reality is that we are facing an aggressor in Vladimir Putin, who is wantonly destroying a neighbouring sovereign nation. And we do need to work with countries across the world to find alternative sources of oil and gas. And Russia is a threat, not just to regional security, but to global security.
Yeah, but even if they're chopped
so
heads off.
we have to work with all of our allies around the world, including Saudi Arabia, to find alternative sources. Saudi Arabia is not a global security threat in the way that Russia is. and we have to work with them. We have to work with...
Terrible.
I am not condoning the policies of Saudi Arabia. What I'm saying is we are in an existential threat about European security and global security, and we need to find alternative sources of oil and gas so we are no longer dependent on Vladimir Putin and his appalling regime.
I have to let you go. It'd be great to talk to you for longer, but we must leave it there for now.
Thanks very much.
Hopefully next time you come, we'll be celebrating the fact that 3 dual nationals are back home. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. The Telegraph, let's have a look what they're doing. They're splashing with Ukraine will never join NATO following President Zelensky's statement yesterday. And The Guardian also looks at this story as President Zelensky acknowledges that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. The Times also leads with those comments, and the front page of the Daily Mirror this morning examining Boris Johnson's trip to Saudi Arabia to talk oil and also energy supplies. Ukraine's president has said that there is definitely room for compromise in peace talks with Russia, suggesting that Ukraine could drop its ambition to join NATO. But he also had an uncompromising message telling Moscow in his nightly address that the war would end in disgrace, poverty and year-long isolation for Russians. Let's take you through the key developments, should we? Talks between Ukraine and Russia will resume this morning, with President Zelensky describing the negotiations as more realistic. It comes after the Ukrainian leader admitted there's no chance his country will join NATO. According to the latest intelligence update from the UK's Ministry of Defence, Russia is struggling to conduct offensive operations in the face of sustained Ukrainian resistance. A 36-hour curfew has begun in the capital of Kyiv after residential buildings were hit by heavy shelling, which killed 5 people yesterday. Explosions were heard this morning. Local authorities say that around 2,000 cars were able to leave the besieged city of Mariupol, where Russian forces are reported to have taken 400 patients and medical staff at a hospital as hostages. Here's Greg Milam.
This used to be a quiet neighborhood in the city center, and now it is completely in ruins.
With every home destroyed, lives are being shattered in Ukraine. Not military targets, but civilian ones. Dozens of strikes in the past 24 hours in this, the second largest city, Kharkiv. This country is being taken apart, piece by piece, by Russian forces. Standing in their way, Ukraine's military continues to defy the odds. These, some of the soldiers injured in pushing the Russians back from the city of Mykolaiv.
We started to attack the enemy and came under fire. Our tank, the turret to be exact, stopped working. The others left without warning. Then the Russian tanks came and we barely managed to get away.
There was defiance too in Ukraine's parliament, 3/4 of its members attending in person an emergency session. And how about this for a show of solidarity from Europe? The Polish, Czech and Slovenian prime ministers travelling to Kyiv, a city under curfew, for talks with President Zelensky. In his latest address to the Ukrainian people, he offered the slightest bit of hope.
Everyone should work, including our representatives, our delegation, for negotiations with the Russian Federation. It is difficult, but important, as any war ends with an agreement. The meetings continue, and I'm informed the positions during the negotiations already sound more realistic.
He'll bring his virtual tour of the world's capitals to Washington today to ask the US Congress for more help. The humanitarian aid is arriving in Ukraine, this shipment in the city of Vinnytsia, vital supplies for those who've remained behind and who've seen the places they call home reduced to this. This footage filmed by the Ukrainian military in the city of Okturka, another left in ruins, and for all its defiance, a country wondering where all this ends. Greg Milam, Sky News, Washington.
Well, the Russian journalist who interrupted a state TV news broadcast by holding up a sign protesting against the country's invasion of Ukraine has been fined the equivalent of £210. It's now illegal in Russia to contradict the government's narrative of the war, and the Kremlin claimed that Marina Ozvyakova's actions amounted to an act of hooliganism. It's not clear if she'll face more serious charges over the protests. She spoke yesterday as she came out of court.
I made this decision by myself because I don't like Russia started this invasion, and it was really terrible.
Taiwan is watching events in Ukraine even more closely than the rest of us following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Taiwan is holding various military exercises in the coming weeks in case China were to take the region by force. Let's find out more, should we? Tom standing by for us now. Hi, Tom, tell us more.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, Taiwan describes these as routine military drills. It does have to be in a state of preparedness because it does face this existential threat, but it has raised its alert level as a result of the Ukraine war. And there are similarities between Ukraine and Russia and Taiwan and China. These are young, small democracies next door to authoritarian military giants who have designs on that territory. So the question has come up, but both sides would actually try and heighten the differences too. Taiwan would say its economy is a lot bigger, it's a lot further away, it's a lot harder to take, and the question of whether the US intervened still hasn't been settled. China, for its part, it has been talking about Taiwan throughout this crisis, and it doesn't like the comparison because it insists that Taiwan is part of its territory. This is not about invading a sovereign country because it doesn't see Taiwan as a sovereign country. It sees it as an internal affair. So this has always been these tensions, but the Ukraine crisis, the Ukraine war has put them into fresh perspective, and both sides really will be looking at the lessons learned. I think China will see that the US has not intervened in Ukraine and wonder if that would be the case for Taiwan. Taiwan, for its part, would have seen how a smaller army against a vastly stronger military has managed to hold them out, has managed to fight them back in many instances, and wonder whether those lessons can be applied to its own defence. Now, this isn't an imminent danger. There is not an invasion about to happen. We would see that building up as we did with Ukraine, and war is not inevitable. But this is a priority for the Chinese Communist Party, and it's a priority for Xi Jinping. It's one of the things that could cement his legacies up there with Chairman Mao and Deng Xiaoping in terms of the pantheon of communist leaders. We're not there yet, but I think both sides looking at Ukraine very nervously and trying to draw lessons from what's happening, and that's why you're seeing these drills on those Taiwanese islands today.
OK, thanks, Tom. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you this morning. We'll get the very latest on Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's situation. We're going to be speaking to her MP, Labour's Tulip Siddiq, just after 8 o'clock. Also speaking to the former International Trade Secretary, Dr. Liam Fox, about the Prime Minister's visit to the Gulf as he tries to reduce reliance on Moscow for oil and gas. And we'll be speaking to 2 doctors out of Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv, as they continue providing palliative care for children in the war-torn region. Chatting to the Foreign Secretary a few moments ago, I'm sure you caught that. The Prime Minister is presently in the Middle East trying to secure an oil deal. He's just said this from Abu Dhabi.
If you look at what Putin's doing in Ukraine, it's causing global uncertainty and a spike in the price of oil. That feeds through to the forecourts in the UK. Everybody can see the effect of the increase in gas prices. That's coming through, and we've got to make sure that we're prepared and that we're taking steps to mitigate that, to help people with the cost of living. So next week we're going to be setting out the energy strategy for the UK. Massive jump forward on renewables, more nuclear, using our own hydrocarbons more effectively. Also looking at what we can do to source hydrocarbons from places other than Russia. We've got to get off Russian hydrocarbons. But the reason for coming here is that it's not just that they've got oil, they're also some of the biggest investors here in the Gulf in UK renewables, in our wind farms, and that's what we'll be talking about.
Do you think you can persuade oil producers today to turn the taps on?
It's not just a question of looking at the OPEC countries and what they can do to increase supply. There's also, as I say, though that is important, there's also the issue of Emirati investment in UK wind farms, already huge. What more can they do? We need to double the pace of our construction of wind farms. We're already one of the biggest producers of offshore wind power in the world. When we look at the dependency that the West in particular has built up on Putin's hydrocarbons, on Putin's oil and gas, we can see what a mistake that was, because he's been able to blackmail the West, to hold Western economies to ransom. We need independence.
But part of your answer to that is to work with a regime like Saudi Arabia. I mean, why are you comfortable working with a regime like that? Has a very questionable human rights record, and you've been criticised by many people for being willing to appeal to them.
And I've raised all those issues many times over the past since I was Foreign Secretary and beyond, and I'll raise them all again today. But we have long-standing relationships with this part of the world, and we need to recognise the very important relationship that we have and the strength of that relationship, not just in hydrocarbons. This is about investment in the UK over the long term, and genuinely you should look at some of the things. I mean, you talk about Saudi Arabia. They're announcing today a £1 billion investment in Teesside in aviation fuel, in green aviation fuel, I should say. And that is the kind of thing that we want to encourage. Doesn't in any way mean that we can't stick to our principles and raise those issues that we all care about.
Briefly on President Zelensky, he appears to have signalled that he doesn't expect now to join NATO, and he sounds slightly more optimistic about peace talks. What's your take on what's happening, how things are developing?
I talked to Vladimir again yesterday, and of course I understand what he's saying about NATO and the reality of the position, and everybody's always said, and we made it clear to Putin, there's no way Ukraine is going to join NATO anytime soon. But the decision about the future of Ukraine has got to be for the Ukrainian people and for Volodymyr Zelensky as their elected leader. And we will back him. And the most important thing is that Putin's aggression, his absolutely barbaric attacks on Ukraine, should stop, and they should not be seen to have succeeded, and they won't succeed.
And just lastly, there's been some renewed optimism about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. I know you were asked about this yesterday, but now you're in the region. Can you update people on any progress? Is it true that there's a negotiating team in Tehran?
It's true, and has been for a long time, Laura, that we're negotiating for the release of our dual nationals in Tehran. Some very sad cases, including Nazanin. I really don't think I should say much more. I'm sorry, although things are moving forward. I shouldn't really say much more right now, just because those negotiations continue to be underway, and we're going right up to the wire.
Tamara's here, Foreign Secretary, echoing that as well, of course, and agreeing that there was a team in Tehran trying to get them home.
Yes, he said things are moving forward, but we have to be very careful because, of course, there's been false dawns before for poor Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and her family, and, of course, the families of the other two dual nationals who were there as well. Boris Johnson was careful to say that they've been negotiating for some time. It looks like things may be reaching a crunch point, but, of course, we can never be sure until, probably anyone is actually on a plane that anything is going to start moving there. But tentative hope after it was revealed by her MP yesterday that Nazanin had got her passport back yesterday. So, of course, fingers crossed for all of them. The Foreign Secretary did stress that this is unrelated in the British government's eyes to the payment of £400 million that the government accepts it needs to pay for a tank deal back in 1979. The Iranians paid, the British government never handed over the tanks because, of course, the Shah of Iran was deposed. So that may be paid. Will that unlock some movement on the cases of the dual nationals?
OK, let's hear what Liz Truss had to say.
We are working very hard, and I've made a priority as Foreign Secretary to secure the release of Nazanin, Anousheh and Murad, who are all detained in Iran. We've also made it a priority to pay the debt that we owe to Iran, but I can't say anything more than that, I'm afraid.
Tell us about the debt. 400 million quid thereabouts as a result of tanks that were paid for but then never delivered. Where are we with that?
Well, we have been clear this is a legitimate debt that we do owe Iran, and we have been seeking ways to pay it.
How can we pay it if they're sanctioned and they can't get the money?
Well, I can't go into details, I'm afraid, but we are looking for ways to pay it, and we have been very clear it is a legitimate debt that the United Kingdom owes Iran.
Everybody very excited about the prospect of these three dual nationals finally being able to come home. Has the dial moved at all over the last few days?
As I say, we have been having discussions. I met my counterpart, the Iranian Foreign Minister, back in September. We've been in regular touch since. We do have a team in Tehran, but I absolutely can't say anything else at this stage.
Do you know when you might be able to say more?
No, I don't.
What do you make of that?
Well, it sounds like she's being very careful, which she must be at this stage. But some of the issues which have been discussed in relation to this, the payment of the debt, which the UK government stresses is unrelated, but now the government says it is legitimate and wants to pay it, how it can pay it given that Iran is subject to UK sanctions and has been since the collapse of the nuclear deal back in 2018. That has been one of the stumbling blocks to paying that debt. Is there a way possibly forward with that, with the negotiations in Vienna over a new nuclear deal, or can it be paid in some other way that isn't cash? All of these issues have been bubbling away for many months now. If we are close to a resolution of all those things, and Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's lawyer suggested that may be the case, then perhaps that may unlock the key to her release. Certainly her husband Richard has linked the two issues and said that in the minds of the Iranian regime, they are all linked.
Exactly so. We don't know when we might hear more. We did hear from Tulip Sadiq yesterday. She tweeted yesterday. We're actually going to hear from her on the programme later on. What did she say?
She said yesterday that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe had her passport returned to her. She is in Tehran under house arrest, and it had been returned to her, and so she was hopeful that something may be moving. She said that there was a British negotiating team there, but of course we need to be very careful because these negotiations may well be at a delicate stage, which is why the Prime Minister said we are working very hard on it. We have been negotiating for some time, but of course he knows that Nazanin has had false hope before, and that, of course, her family won't be feeling reassured until she is on her way back to the UK, if indeed that is what is going to happen.
Thanks very much indeed. Tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it. Thanks very much indeed. Let's bring in Dr. Liam Fox, who knows very well about negotiating in that region of the world. Hello to you, Dr. Fox. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. Obviously, you can appreciate why the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister are both being very cautious. Is there anything that we can pick from what they've said, do you think?
Well, in terms of the negotiations with Iran, I've never been in favour of the JCPOA, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask on that. But clearly it's a very complex situation, and they're being, I think, understandably very cautious about what they say.
Yeah, the Prime Minister is presently in the region, as I said, to try to negotiate a deal with the Saudis in regards to oil. How tricky is that to do?
Well, it's essential that the Prime Minister makes this visit because energy security and economic security and national security have become increasingly interlinked in recent years. And it's essential that we understand our energy balance in the United Kingdom. Although we've got much better at producing green electricity from renewables, electricity still only makes up about 19% of our energy consumption. Still about 44% is accounted for by oil, mainly for transport and the transport industry in the UK, and about 30% or so for gas for heating. So we're still quite a long way from being non-fossil fuel dependent. And I think that we need to recognise that for as long as we are dependent on fossil fuels, we need to have a wider range where they come from, preferably producing more ourselves, of course. But when we get to that international dependence, we have to make sure that more of it's going to come from a predictable source and not, as we've seen in recent years, becoming more dependent on Russian oil and gas. The UK, of course, is not particularly dependent on that directly, but we are indirectly because our major trading partners, including the European Union, are very dependent, for example, on Russian gas.
But are Saudis really the right sort of people for us to do business with? I mean, we were wooed by President Putin 20 years ago, and of late, he's been murdering babies and pregnant women. The Saudis killed 81 people in a single day. Are those the sort of people we want to do business with?
Well, I think you have to draw a big difference between an invasion of Ukraine and something that's done through a country's judicial system, whatever I think of the death penalty. I think there's a real issue here. Saudi Arabia has actually been a very good ally of the United Kingdom in security and intelligence areas. Where the Prime Minister's obviously also been in the UAE, which is a great ally also of the United Kingdom. We've got a real issue, not with UK dependency on Russian oil and gas, although more on oil than gas, but the huge dependence of our European partners. That's got to therefore be an international effort to try to deal with this. There's no point in Britain alone dealing with its energy dependence issues when our European trading partners and in many cases industrial partners through supply chains have this Russian dependence. And it's very clear that in Putin's Kremlin, we have an aggressive entity that doesn't care for the death or destruction that's raining down on Ukraine at the present time, and we can't possibly be in hock. It's really why I think it's very welcome that the new German Chancellor, Chancellor Scholz, has stopped the certification of Nord Stream 2, which would actually have made Germany more dependent on Russian gas itself. So there are some positive moves within that. But clearly, we've got to act as an international community to ensure that we can continue with our industrial activity on our route to decarbonisation.
Yeah, I'm going to have to push back on that, I'm afraid, Dr. Fox, and point to the fact that back in 2018, a Saudi-led coalition airstrike killed 26 kids on a school bus as they were going to school in the Yemen, as you know. So, you know, it's not just what their policy is on the death penalty, it's them doing airstrikes in foreign countries.
Sure, and I have to push back again on that, and that that Saudi Arabia was responding to attacks on Saudi Arabia, including missile strikes on Riyadh.
So it's okay to bomb a school bus?
No, it's absolutely not, and the international community condemned that. And but this is a war in Yemen that was launched against Saudi Arabia by the Iranian-backed Houthis. We seem to forget that, and it's also very strange that when we're talking about human rights, no one seems to be criticising Iran's very high numbers of executions or the fact that they have been backing terrorist organisations in both Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. So I think you've got to try to get these things in proportion and see the wider perspective.
I think we're the first to criticise Iran as well, as and when is necessary. Let's talk about Ukraine while we're on the subject, should we? It looks as though that Putin seems to be moving to Plan C, given that A and B don't seem to have worked so far. What more can the British do to help the Ukrainian government?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is real pressure now appearing on the Russian government. It was always very clear that the financial sanctions, particularly the sanctioning of the Russian central bank, would do a great deal of damage to Putin's authority and ability to run his economy. And some of the other measures, for example, banning dual-use items, would damage his war machine too. I think it's becoming increasingly clear that his logistics, his military capabilities are not what they thought they were. The Russians have suffered far more damage than they thought they would. The fact they're using conscripts and looking for troops elsewhere, I think, tends to raise questions about whether the Russian military are actually genuinely committed to this or whether there are splits in policy there. Whatever the reason, you're quite right. Putin has not achieved his objectives. The Ukrainians have been much better, and we should continue to supply them with the military equipment that they're asking for. And I think that it's more than anything else, it's a moral duty to help people defend themselves. And of course, it's their right under the UN Charter as a sovereign nation to do so. And I think that we have to recognize that this is not just an attack on Ukraine, it's an attack on all the values we have of international law, of sovereignty, and of free people making the decisions to defend themselves in a democracy.
Good to talk to you, Dr. Fox. As always, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Kate.
NATO defence ministers meeting in Brussels this morning with military commanders instructed to draw up plans for a new way to deter Russia. Let's find out more, should we? And Laura, who's been covering the story for us all week, is with us again. Hi, Laura. Good morning. Good morning. What are we expecting?
Yeah, morning, Kay. Well, Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, has just arrived here. He stressed the importance of the alliance. He talked about the privilege of being a member of NATO and then said it was important NATO now looks at further ways to show support to Ukraine and support for Ukrainian freedoms as well. So discussions will be centring around that. Ben Wallace, though, tweeted already saying that the UK is planning to provide Ukraine with anti-air weapons as well. So there'll be talk around what they can do. Yesterday, we heard very sort of stern words from Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg talking about this new reality, as he put it, the need to reset our military posture. And so what they'll be doing here is looking at ways they can engage military commanders to come up with strategies and things to bolster that eastern flank. Now, there are already 40,000 NATO-led troops pretty much centred around those countries bordering Ukraine at the moment, looking at ways to reinforce that potentially, and also looking at ways to strengthen air defence systems as well. In recent days, there have been, it's thought, 3 Russian drone incursions into NATO countries, Poland, Croatia and Romania as well. And the worry is, NATO isn't really commenting much about that at the moment, but the worry is these sorts of incidents could lead to accidents, and that could inadvertently see things really spiral out of control. So very much a need to tread carefully when it comes to this. But as I say, a strengthening of positions along the in NATO Eastern Alliance countries particularly. And then talks too, Ben Wallace confirmed, about this Polish proposal to put an international peacekeeping mission in Ukraine as well. That will be on the agenda as well. And appearing via video link for the first of the meetings, Kay, will be the Ukrainian defence minister as well. And he will no doubt ask for more military support in Ukraine.
OK, thank you. Thanks a lot. Let's tell you about a secondary school girl who was strip searched alone in 2020 by the Met after 2 female officers falsely suspected her of using cannabis. A safeguarding report into the incident, which happened in Hackney, says it was unjustified and racism was likely to have been a factor. Milena has more for us in the newsroom for us now. Hello to you, Milena. Good morning. What happened to this young girl?
Good morning, Kay. Well, teachers actually suspected that she had cannabis on her because they thought she smelt of it. They called the police. 2 female officers, as you said, strip searched her. No other adults were present. And this safeguarding review says that even though they knew she was on her period, she was forced to remove her sanitary towel. Now, no cannabis was found and the girls were sent home in a taxi. However, the impact on her has been profound. Her family says that she went from a happy-go-lucky girl to someone who's a recluse, hardly speaks and self-harms. They strongly believe that racism played a part in what happened to her. And this safeguarding review agrees, saying that it would have been unlikely that she would have had the same experience had she not been black. The report also says that something called adultification also likely played a part, and that means when adults perceive black children as older than they are because they seem to them more streetwise. Now, this incident is being investigated by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. It was condemned by the London Mayor Sadiq Khan. He said, "This is shocking and deeply disturbing. I'm extremely concerned by the findings of this report. No child should ever have to face a situation like this. It's entirely right that the incident is being investigated by the IOPC. Scotland Yard has now apologised for the incident and they say it should have never happened."
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Manu. Now, the leader of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, has said there are no plans to further tighten COVID-19 rules as the city battles to contain an escalating outbreak. Hong Kong health authorities reported 27,765 new COVID-19 cases on Tuesday and 228 deaths, making it the worst outbreak to date. The upcoming election, currently set for May, could also be delayed as a result. Looking at the latest COVID data here, and in the most recent 24-hour period, the UK has registered 109,800 new cases, 200 new deaths, taking the total death toll to 163,095. Thousands of racegoers descended on a Gloucestershire racecourse yesterday for the first day of the Cheltenham races, of course. Crowds returned to the track this year after organisers were forced to hold 2021's event behind closed doors. Frankie Dettori, pictured here In the Mail this morning, having a blast with Penny Lancaster. Good for him. Now, some users are reporting difficulty in ordering lateral flow tests for home delivery from the official government website. The free availability of these tests is scheduled to end on the 1st of April, but it comes as nearly 110,000 people have tested positive across the UK in the latest 24-hour period. I've been trying for the last 4 days. Nothing. Let's look at some of today's other headlines for you now. And fire engines have reportedly attended Pinewood Studios after a fire broke out on a film set. Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue have said. Superman, Harry Potter and the James Bond movies are among the blockbusters that have been filmed there. MPs have criticised the Department of Health for, in their words, overseeing years of decline in the NHS in England. A report by the Public Accounts Committee says NHS cancer and waiting times targets are underperforming and 6.1 million people are waiting for treatment. Looking at some of the pictures making the morning papers for you, and The Guardian has this picture of a mum on the far left, there she is, looking at her newborn baby in Odessa in Ukraine. The Times has this shot of a street in the same city. Here we go. Times. There we go. Looking like the beaches of Normandy to block Russian tanks. And the Telegraph shows us women in northern India celebrating the first day of Holi, which is the Hindu spring festival of colours. Look as though they're having a great time, don't they? Maybe not the lady. I don't know why she's got that thing on her head at the back. Somebody will tell me. I've probably offended somebody, haven't I? I'm sorry in advance. Now, the government has abandoned its animals abroad bill, which would have brought some of the toughest laws in the world on the import of gruesome animal souvenirs such as lion heads. What is that about? Joining us now is the environmental journalist, safari operator and the director of the campaign group Blood Lions, Ian Mickler. Hi, Ian. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Your reaction to the news?
Well, first of all, good morning. Yes, very disappointing, but given the background to how this came about, there's a lot of mismatched logic and reasoning here. So I guess it's hardly surprising, but hopefully, we can turn this around and it can be resubmitted in months to come.
I can't begin to comprehend why they would not just sign this through. Animals are such majestic creatures and are endangered, aren't they?
Yes. So I think the first point to make is that for me and many other scientists, conservationists, people who live and work in Africa in these spaces, we don't believe that trophy hunting is an effective or efficient conservation tool. So I think that's the very important point to put forward. But secondly, if you look at the background, and I think that'll lead to why we're in this position. So the hunting bans were gazetted against a background that still permitted hunting of sorts in the UK. So there's a contradiction there in some ways. And then we had the sentience laws and the welfare legislation proposed. So having a turnaround or complete about face also brings those laws and those attempts into contradiction. Another mismatched logic here is that we have an acceptance, as you say, that wildlife is in steep decline, alarmingly so for many species. Many of them are regarded as endangered. But then is the current government saying, hang on, they're going back on their logic and it's still okay to kill them for sport? And of course, the interesting part is that this seems to be a reversal against overwhelming majorities in the UK, and especially the Conservative Party, who are against trophy hunting and importing these trophies. So I think, in the end, it looks like a very powerful minority lobby representing the vested interests has again influenced the political system. And this is no doubt the powerful hunting bodies, as well as party donors and other elites.
Okay. Are you quietly hopeful, though, that it may be revisited?
Well, I think it must be revisited because increasingly we're seeing that, the science is showing that actually it's not an effective way to conserve our threatened and endangered species. We continue to have tens of thousands of these animals killed over every decade, yet the statistics show that these animals continue to be in decline. And so I think what we have here is we have hunters using what I refer to as mismatched reasoning. So they try to justify a sport and a pastime using a conservation argument, and it's mismatched. And this is taking place when we're having this ethical reckoning, really. And we're asking this question, is in what many scientists are calling the beginning of the sixth mass extinction, are we still going to justify the fact that we can go out and kill many of these endangered animals for fun? And I think increasingly the hunting fraternity will be on the back foot because it just doesn't add up. It's simply, it's not acceptable, it's not working. And actually, at the end of the day, it's unethical and immoral.
It certainly is. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you. Hopefully the government will change their minds soon. Thank you. It makes my blood boil. I mean, why? I just don't get it. Let's find out what's happening in Ukraine this morning. Should we have seen a missile strike in the early hours of this morning? Let's have a quick look. Goodness me, we can't say what building was hit there, but I'm guessing it's a Russian missile, and they continue to bombard Kyiv, which is almost completely surrounded now by Russian troops and artillery. We're approaching the 3-week mark of the war in Ukraine, and each morning Ukrainians in the eastern city of Kharkiv are waking up to sights like this.
This used to be a quiet neighborhood in the city center, and now it is completely in ruins, destroyed because of the Russian bombardments.
Well, the shelling has been indiscriminate, and the effect has been drastic for those offering palliative care to children in the city. The Russian strikes have destroyed vital healthcare facilities and hospices, and those still working in the city are warning of difficulties getting aid to the children that need it, including Dr. Andrei Penkov, who is joining us now. Hello to you, Doctor. Thank you for joining us, a paediatrician, I should say. The challenges that normal, everyday people are facing in Ukraine, tragic. When those people are then ill, I can't even begin to comprehend. Tell me some of the challenges that people are facing.
Okay, thank you so much for invitation. Thank you so much, all British people, for help. Your Prime Minister, he's doing a lot for us now to help with this war. Me and my colleague Elena are now in Kharkiv, and I can tell you that situation absolutely horrible. Russian army destroyed more than 600 buildings, including schools, hospitals, hospices, and the big challenge is a lack of medications, lack of medical services, because many people left our city, but still 100,000 in our city, and all day on the call I counseling the parents and sick children, ill children, and the big problem is they cannot reach the medical service. They cannot go to doctors because there are a lot of areas without medical service. Concerning the palliative care, it's a disaster. In 2015, Elena and I visited Loughborough and the famous children hospice, the first children's hospital in the world, Rainbow, if you know, which was led by Dr. Sabir Jasal. I would to tell him big thanks and say hello to Sadbir, to Armorer. They invited us, and we tried to build the same system in Ukraine. We tried to help vulnerable children with severe medical conditions. But now the help for these children absolutely impossible. It's about specialists, it's about medications, it's about services, it's about equipment. I would say it's disaster for these people. Many families divided, and women and children left our city. A lot of old people, their grandmothers, fathers, they stay here without medical help.
Yeah.
Nobody can,
I completely understand. And I'm so sorry we are out of time, but do keep in touch with us, and we'd like to check in with you again and see how the situation is developing. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the programme. Breaking news from Ukraine in a moment.